Hello, welcome back to my channel. I've tried to do this intro so many times, but I feel like I just keep tripping over my words because I'm not sure where to start with this. But today I just want to discuss my experience of telling my Indian Sikh parents about my white boyfriend who was not Sikh. I know some of you follow me on Instagram and on YouTube, so you know that me and Callum are now engaged, so he is my fiance now. But the experience I'm going to be talking about happened almost 4 years ago, and I still struggle with it to this day. That's why I never spent too much time thinking about it, because it is so very upsetting for me. I promised myself I wasn't going to cry. And this is exactly why I need to do this video and tell my story, because I feel like it's going to be the first step in accepting what's happened, moving on, and forgiving everyone that was involved. I don't want to hold on to this resentment I have inside of me, or this anger I hold. It's not doing any good. Now that I've had a minute to calm down, I think I'd want to tell you a little bit about my background first and a little bit about my home life. So I come from a Punjabi Sikh family. My dad is the eldest of all his siblings. Same as me, I'm the eldest of all my siblings too, and me and my dad have very similar personalities, and also being the eldest as well, we're both big control freaks. We're very, very protective. Even of friends, we can be seriously overprotective. And it was just little habits like that that I really bonded with my dad more than my mum from a really young age. And my dad was my best friend. I don't know if this is the right point to slot this in, but I never saw myself as wanting to get married just because of my parents' divorce. It was quite messy, and because I was taking care of my brother for such a long time, obviously me and my brother are very close in age, so it's only natural that he drifted more towards me than my dad when it came to comfort. And I think it just put a lot of strain on me that I could never imagine going through something like that myself, which is why I was just so against the idea of marriage. I didn't even like talking about it. I really didn't like it. So anyway, my dad was fully aware of this. So was like my BB, my grandma used to live with us. My dad actually remarried. So technically that was my stepmom, but I've always called her mum because she came into my life at a time that I really needed a motherly figure, and she just came into that role with such grace, and I'm always going to be thankful to her for that. So there was my BB, my dad, my mum, there was my brother Aman, who is 2 years younger than me, and then after a few years of my mum and dad's marriage, they blessed us with two absolutely adorable sisters, Elvie and Jessie. So that was our little family. I think this is the case with most South Asian parents, that I know a lot of like Westerners will see this as them being strict, but I now understand this is just them being very protective of their kids and wanting to keep their kids so close to their roots. But I think because of this fear, my dad was very, very strict with me and my siblings. So we weren't sort of allowed to go out, just like walk around or something, you know, like you just see kids just hanging around cinemas. Like we would never do something like that. I wasn't allowed to go places with my friends unless my dad was like a chaperone. So I couldn't just like decide to go into town one day with my friends to watch a film or something. So it's fair to say we lived a very sheltered life. It was a bit of a shock when I went to uni, just to say the least. So yeah, I just wanted to give you that bit of background first as well, because I feel like it just explains a lot too. And obviously because of that whole sheltered life, my dad's basic idea was that you have middle school and then you have your A-levels. As long as you do great in them, you go into university, get a really good mark in your degree, get a job, and then you'll get married and start your families. So I think that's when I started to make it really clear to my dad when he was having these conversations with me that I wasn't interested in marriage. I never blatantly said that it was because of what my mum and dad went through with their divorce. I felt like that was a bit rude, but I personally just didn't agree with marriage, basically, and my dad seemed surprisingly okay with that for a South Asian parent. He was very chill about it. He was very understanding that even if that means you're going to live with us for the rest of your life, that's completely fine, but I just want to make sure that you make something of yourself where you get a good degree, get a good job, and you can stay home for the rest of your life if you need to. And that was honestly my goal, that I was going to be one of those kids that just stays at home with the family forever and just has a decent job. When it came to actually going to uni, my uni was about, I think, 2 hours away, hour and a half away, and that commute every day, I wasn't ready to do that. So after a lot of convincing, I managed to convince my dad to let me stay on campus and that I'd come home every weekend. And that was going to be our little arrangement of him still feeling like I'm at home, but then me also getting that little bit of freedom of being able to stay on campus, and rather than like driving back and forth every single day for lessons. So I think that was firstly the biggest thing. Like, there was a lot of resistance when I first suggested that to my dad, but I think I kind of expected that anyway. South Asian parents, like I said, are incredibly overprotective, and they just fear and like panic of like what could happen, like someone's going to manipulate you, or you're going to turn into like a party animal and you start doing drugs or alcohol. Obviously you can't blame them. Like, they are just very overprotective. I don't know how else to stress that enough, because he's just kept me sheltered all my life, and all of a sudden he was having to let go of that grip. I know it wasn't easy for him, and it was a huge step for my dad to let me just stay on campus and just hope that I'm okay for 5 days a week until I come home on the weekend. And I remember it was my dad and my brother came to drop me off. We did want to take my mum and my sisters, but my sister Jessie was still very, very young at this point. She was practically like a newborn. So mum was at home with Avi and Jessie. Aman just about got into the car. As soon as I even got to uni, it was already a very uncomfortable experience. So after helping me trying to get all of this stuff into the shared kitchen and my tiny little bedroom, they finally said goodbye, and I remember just sitting there for like half an hour to an hour just not knowing what to do. This was the first time I had truly been on my own, and I just remember I was just still, like, I wasn't even panicking or upset. I was just generally just sat still for like an hour, that I'm on my own now. And then when I finally snapped out of it, I just remembered my dad had like left like a lot of cookies and biscuits and stuff. I just have a massive sweet tooth, so he brought like lots of little snacks down. So I took one of those snacks around the corridor, because all of the bottom floor was just girls. So I knocked on doors offering, like, I think there was chocolate fingers, and just trying to make friends. So they've been like, oh, would you like a cup of tea with these with these biscuits? So I got to know most of the girls in my dorm, and then we thought we'd try and say hello to everyone else around as well. So we found out that the floor upstairs was all boys, so they had all girls downstairs, which is our floor, and then they had all boys, and then the top 2 floors I think were empty. So we said hello, we said hello to everyone upstairs, and then we went outside because they had like little grassy areas outside. We thought we'd sit there, and we got to know another group of guys that were living in the building next to us, and we found out that their halls had been moved because there had been some sort of water problem, so they were all staying there, and we were all just like, oh well, why don't we all just sit outside and like get to know each other. And that's when I met Callum, and the guys and the girls friendship group just kind of merged, and we just had like one big friendship group. So I obviously met Callum then, but I didn't know him. I met him on the first day of uni, but I didn't really know anything about him. I'd just been introduced as part of this little friendship group we'd all just created. So it wasn't until we started going to classes that I realised that Callum was in every single one of my class, as well as my friend Katrina. We were all, well, the three of us were on ancient history course, so obviously all our lessons were all together. So time went on. So obviously the first university started in September, so I met Callum the first week of September when it was Freshers Week, and time just sort of went on with lessons and so on. But it wasn't until I think Halloween, so late October, it was a couple of days after my birthday, that there was this Halloween party and everyone was doing fancy dress. So most of the guys from our friendship group were on the hockey team, so they all wanted to go as like zombie hockey players. So like the girls were helping out doing like the special effects makeup and stuff on them. And it wasn't until that night that, because we were out as like a full group, that me and Callum got to talking, and we realised just how similar we are, and especially like our upbringing was incredibly similar. Callum's parents are literally just a double copy of my mum and dad, especially because Callum's dad was a lecturer as well, like a senior lecturer. He's lovely now when you get to know him, but when you first meet him, wow, do you get a strict vibe. So yeah, I think straight off the bat we really bonded on that. Like even just dating was out of the question for both of us. Like, is obviously Callum's parents were a bit more like, if you do bring someone home, but he, again, like me, he wasn't allowed out of the house, or just to go out with friends willy-nilly, whatever you wanted. So I think we really bonded on that, and I was quite surprised because I was just like, oh, I just thought that was like a South Asian thing. So we really clicked on that. But yeah, like I was saying, dating was just completely out of the question for me, because even before I left for uni, my dad pulled me aside. Funnily enough, both my mum and dad had this conversation with me, but they didn't know that the other one had already had this conversation, so I had this conversation twice. But so it was, first of all, it was my dad who pulled me aside, and he said, look, Guppy, if you like someone, I want you to come to me first before you like start telling everyone that, oh, we're boyfriend and girlfriend, you start holding hands, or like crossing the line was exactly my dad's words. But we all know what that means. So yeah, I had the conversation with my dad, and then literally an hour later my mum was having the same conversation with me. So that was already drilled into my head. So I was telling Callum about this as well, and he said, yeah, his parents said something like very similar to him, because he'd never had a girlfriend at that point. He'd never brought anyone home, so his parents were very similar, shall we say. We just literally spent the whole day talking, and I think that's when I really knew that this could be a really, really good friend of mine, because I just never clicked with someone like that before. And to know that they've been through a similar situation like I have, I really felt like I had someone to relate to. So obviously we started hanging out more then, because before we used to, I just felt, I don't know why, I just felt really uncomfortable at first just hanging out with Callum on his own, which is why whenever we'd hang out, it was always part of either the big friendship group or Katrina was with me, because it was class, so all three of us were together. So I think after that time where it was just me and him in the library, and we had like a great day just talking, I think that, and obviously we'd realised we'd just click so well, we started hanging out more. So anytime we had like any assignments, or if you wanted to like grab a coffee as a break before we got back to the library or something, I'd always be like, oh, do you want to come with me? Or he'd always bring food or something, and like we very quickly became like the best of friends. And it was really strange because obviously everyone in the friendship group, we all, because there was so many of us, we all had very different personalities. So to see two people clicking that were complete polar opposites was very strange for everyone else as well. But I don't think me and Callum saw it as anything serious until one of our friends pointed out that there's obviously a lot of chemistry between you guys. And I remember that very awkward kind of conversation then between me and Callum that, look, I can't do anything because my parents and dating in the whole Indian world is basically that once you're going out with someone and before you introduce them to your parents, you need to make sure that they're the one and you're not going to break up, because it's such a big deal. Like, everything in Asian culture is just, this is the person you like, so you're going to marry them, kind of thing. Which is incredibly extreme, I know. And I knew the kind of pressure that can put on someone, that they might just be, I'm not saying that they might just be looking for a fling, but I think definitely Western dating is so much more different than Indian dating, because you are putting a lot of pressure on someone that, well, this has to end up somewhere, otherwise why are we doing this? And I know it's quite common, like now especially, people say that you're either dating to break up or you're either dating to get married, but I think no one really takes that seriously. Like, casual relationships are a lot more prevalent in Western society than they are in Asian society. So I think that was definitely one of our first experiences of culture clash. So I think I remember having that very awkward conversation with him. This was around, I think, December, before we broke up for Christmas holidays, and he was just, he was very calm about it. Calm was incredibly calm about it. He was just sort of like, well, we'll just take it as it goes. Like, who's saying that we won't end up together? And I just remember feeling so incredibly gobsmacked, because I'd always been taught that, like, white people or Westerners are only looking for casual relationships, and they will just use you and abuse you, and then they'll walk away and they'll have a relationship with the next person, so they can never be serious about anyone. I know that is an incredibly offensive stereotype, but that's what's mostly said. So for me, that was like the biggest shock, that like literally this guy who I've known for 3 months, and we're only just getting to know each other, we're like good friends, and all of a sudden I'm like, look, if you want to take this a step further, you're gonna have to marry me. Basically, that was like the conversation, that look, this is what's gonna happen. I won't be able to introduce you to my parents unless we know we're there. And I just wanted to be upfront and honest about it, because it's not nice to put that kind of pressure on someone. So that's why I think I had that conversation very early on with him, that I wasn't expecting his reaction. Honestly, I thought maybe he'd just turn around and say, no, look, that's too much for me. I won't be able to handle something like that, and that's it. But it's just, yeah, so hearing that reaction from him was, first of all, it really caught me off guard, but it was incredibly sweet and understanding. Okay, so at this point we had broken up for holidays, so it was the Christmas holidays. So I think it's normally from the 22nd of December or something. But yeah, we'd broken up for a week. Or are they a week and a half? I've literally forgotten so much. Uni seems so long ago. But anyway, it was the Christmas holidays. And obviously, like I mentioned, when I'm at home, I couldn't go out anywhere, I couldn't go see any friends. So most of my contact with Callum was just whenever I could get a chance to text him, which wasn't often, because I had 2 very young sisters that ran around the house like mad. So I was mostly looking after them. But whenever I would get a chance, he would like send me like a message to check I was okay, and just to keep up that kind of line of communication, even when we couldn't see each other. And then when we came back from the holidays, and I think it was like the first week of January, so obviously when we both came back to uni, we talked about our conversation we'd had before the Christmas holidays, and I sort of went into a bit more detail about how serious this could be, that if this does end up being a full relationship, and even if I introduce you to my parents because you want to marry me, it could still mean that I could end up estranged from family. And it was definitely one of the hardest conversations I've had, because I really, really liked him, and it felt like we'd already hit a brick wall before the relationship had even started. But he was very understanding about it. like I said, he was just so chill about it. He was almost like, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I appreciate you letting me know sort of what's involved in all of this. Callum's stance from day one has always been, I don't want you to lose your family because of me, and I will make sure we do absolutely everything. If we will do absolutely everything we can so that you don't miss out on them. So it was on January 18th that he asked me to be his girlfriend. None of our friends knew at this point. We were very quiet about it. So he asked me to be his girlfriend on January 18th, and that was when we officially sort of became a couple. But like none of our friends knew, so we all acted literally exactly the same way. It's not like me and him spent like tons of time together, because then our friends would have noticed something was off. So we just acted literally as normal. And I think everything was just sort of fine for a while, but I think it was like about a month or 2 months in, I started to get really bad anxiety and like panic attacks anytime I would see like a text from my dad or a text from my brother asking about like when I'll be coming home for the weekend or what I want to do. They were literally just doing it as in, well, what can we do when you get here? We want to do something nice when you get home, or we could take the kids swimming. So they're just trying to make plans, but every time I just get so anxious, because then it felt like I was living two separate lives. One is me just feeling like that sense of freedom at uni, and the second life is the golden daughter at home, and I'm just constantly fussing over my siblings and just trying to yeah, so it was sorry, some of the feelings are just coming back up. But yeah, it was a bad time. I think I went through that anxiety from that point on up until the point I told my dad. So I suffered with that same sort of, you know, when your chest gets tight, and sometimes I just feel completely like out of breath. I had that for a good 2 years, and it wasn't until I think May or June that me and Callum had been going out for about 6 months, and we thought we should sit down and talk about, look, if this does get serious, how are we going to do it? Because I think that's where most of my anxiety stemmed from, was the fact that I also couldn't tell my dad, and I told my dad absolutely everything. I felt like, even though my dad was born in India and most people saw him as like Bendu or like too desi and all this stuff, he was literally the most open-minded Indian parent I had come across. So I could literally have discussions with him about like, why aren't interracial relationships okay in your mind? Like, I know, dangerous topic back then, but I would ask him that stuff, or like even just pregnancy or abortions, or like any sort of topics that mostly South Asians feel really awkward talking about with their dad, I talked about with my dad. It was like literally no problem. But so I think that's why I felt such almost pain inside me, that I couldn't tell my best friend. I really wanted to let my dad know that I'd found someone so special, and someone that's just brought such light into my life, and I wasn't able to tell him that, because at one side I'm thinking my dad is so understanding compared to other South Asian parents, but on the other side I'm worried about, but he's the eldest, he's got so much pressure on his head, he's always had that pressure all his life. Is this something that is just going to be too much for him, because he's going to feel like, oh well, I hold all the honour in the house and this is just going to dishonour me? There was just so much noise in my head all the time. And so when I was having this conversation with Callum, we had a proper think about it. We did so much research of like how other like Indian girls have come out to their parents, whether it's or Indian guys even, and there wasn't that much. So we just made an active decision ourselves that, you know what, let's just get to the basis of why my dad would be upset with this. So my main thinking was my dad will be more upset with this because Callum is white and he has a certain idea of what white boys are like. So obviously, like I explained earlier, there's this really terrible stereotype that most white people, when it comes to dating outside of their race, they just see it as a phase or something to tick it off their bucket list. They will never be serious about that person because they value their own race above others. So I was like, right, okay, so how do we prove to my dad that this isn't a phase? So we both made an active decision then that, right, okay, we will tell my dad after the point of 1 year or 1.5 years or 2 years, so then he knows that if they've been together for that long, it can't be a phase. He's not going to leave her. They obviously care about each other very much. So we had this conversation at 6 months of dating. Already I felt so guilty because I felt like I was putting so much pressure on Callum, and I just kept telling him that, look, literally no one knows, even at this point. If you feel like it's just too much, just tell me, because as much as I loved him, I couldn't shake that feeling of guilt of, one, letting my parents down, and guilt of ruining someone's life, of just like throwing this huge thing on them. But Callum's always been so supportive and so sweet. You can tell he was the one from day one. It's just really upsetting thinking about it, because in the first few months when I should have been enjoying like the early stages of a relationship where everything's rainbows, I was going through so much anxiety, and I just felt like I'd put like a horrible burden on Callum. And I think that was definitely the first stage I started to notice that my mental health was really going downhill. Even though I was so incredibly happy anytime I was with him, it was in moments when I was on my own that I felt like I had so much to think about. I had my family, and I was just so worried about losing Avi and Jessie, because Avi was born first, and I loved her as if she was my own daughter. I spent so much time with her, and she was just such a wonderful kid. She was so smart, and she was premature when she was born. I just remember being so worried that she might not make it. And when she did, and to watch her just grow up and just completely shoot up, she was the tallest kid in the class. It was almost like everything's going to be okay. And even as she was growing up, she started to show more signs of being like really artsy and creative. I've still got so many drawings from her, and even she'd make some incredible things as well. She was like 3 or 4 years old when she made me this elaborate envelope with like this folding out card. She was such a bright kid, and I think I definitely attached myself to her more because of that, because I'm very artsy myself, and I genuinely felt like this is my daughter, and I spent so much time with her. So I think that definitely played on my mind a lot, that what if this is the worst case scenario and I lose everyone and I just never get to see them again? And how am I going to deal with that? And then on the flip side, whenever it was the 6-week holidays, after me and Callum had this big conversation after the whole 6-month talk, it was the summer holidays, just 6-week holidays, and I was at home again. I couldn't see him for 6 weeks because I can't go out. I can't go out with friends. And he'd even suggested a few times of, oh, there's a train station near your house, so if you just go on for a walk with you and your mum, I could just see you from afar, just so I can see that you're okay. And it's just remembering stuff like this, it just makes me upset that that was his first relationship and he didn't even get to enjoy those early stages. And obviously I told him not to come down, I just didn't want to risk it, but it was stuff like that just made me more upset that he's having to like think about waving to me from afar because he can't see me in those 6 weeks. And I felt guilty about not being able to message him often because, again, I was spending so much time with Abby, and especially Jessie was just a baby now as well. And I was going to say my brother Aman would just, I think I just remember him gaming a lot. He was definitely peak teenager, so he just liked to be in his room and play games. But whenever I was home, I definitely spent a lot more time with Avi and my BB. I definitely got closer to my BB in the years when I like moved to uni, and I generally really look forward to going home on the weekend to like tell her everything. Um, but yeah, so everything, like the whole home life, just made it really hard for me to reply to him often. But we tried to keep up that line of communication whenever we could. And sometimes I just don't know how we got through all of that. I think that's why communication is just so important, because imagine having an argument in a time like that where you can't console each other straight away and everything just flies out of control. But I think that's why I really appreciate Callum. Has literally the patience of a saint. He's so understanding, and he just knew the amount of pressure that was on me, and he never threw anything like that in my face, that why didn't you reply or blah blah blah. He just wouldn't do it. He'd be very understanding, like no, I know you're busy or you've got this. He wouldn't blow anything out of proportion for no reason, and I really appreciated that. But again, when I was with my family, I was fine in the day, but then when it come to night time, I'd just stay up at night thinking, well, what if I never get to see Callum again because I choose my family? And it didn't matter which side I was on. I couldn't stop overthinking, because when I was with Callum, I was worried about losing them, and when I was with them, I was worried about losing Callum, and it was just constant mental torture. I was just overthinking all the time. Oh god, this whole no crying thing is really not going well. Another year went on after those 6-week holidays, after the initial year, when I thought, you know what, I spent enough time living 2 different lives, and we'd decided that when it gets to the 2-year point that we were going to tell my dad. And Callum definitely started to feel that fear of maybe she's not introducing me to her parents because she's not serious about me. But it was generally just fear on my side. So I think that was another big culture clash, that even though he was so understanding, he was thinking of it the opposite way, that maybe she's not serious about me, that's why she doesn't want to introduce me to her parents, because it could mean marriage, and I'm ready for that, but maybe she's not ready for that. But for me, all I could think of, I wasn't even thinking about marriage. All I could think about was, what if I lose my family? Like, what if this just goes completely wrong? And I was thinking just worst case scenario. So it got to that 2-year point, and I was like, right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna tell my parents. So I started researching again. What's the best way to do it? How can I ease them into it? And there was literally no kind of happy stories I could find online, and I just kind of gave up on it again. And then it wasn't until 2-3 weeks later that I was like, no, you know what, I need to do this. And I picked up my laptop again, tried to scour through, find any forums, and then Callum joined me as well, and we started looking through, and he found stories of some people that were so scared to tell in their families. They had whole other families where they'd married like a white woman and they had babies, and their parents have no idea. And that story just struck such a chord with me that I don't want to have to do that. Like, if I have a family and I bring my first child into this world, I want to be able to share that with my mum and dad. I want to be able to share that with my brother and be like, this is your niece or your nephew. And that was the point that I was like, you know what, I don't care if it goes horribly wrong or it goes brilliantly good. I just need to tell them, because I just need to rip off the band-aid, otherwise I'm never going to do it, and I hate keeping them in the dark. I need to tell them. that was my plan. I still had no idea what I was going to do about it, and funnily enough, the same evening I was just catching up on YouTube and I came across Nabella, and she had a video of, now Nabella's a Bangladeshi Muslim, so Nabella's partner Seth is white, and she was telling the story of how she told her parents and they finally accepted Seth into their family. So she had mentioned that one of the things she did first was get one of his siblings on board just to soften the blow a little bit. So if she told one of his siblings the truth, it would make maybe telling her parents a little bit easier. And I think she told her eldest sister, I can't remember too well. So I thought, okay, you know what? I will tell Aman first. And so my idea was I'm not just going to spring it on him, because one thing about my brother is he is very overprotective of me. Not even just when it comes to like, oh well, you're not allowed boys kind of thing. Like, he's just overprotective of me in general. Like, even when I hung out with cousins and stuff, we've talked about this, we're both very overprotective of our siblings. Like, no, you can't mess around with them kind of thing. So I knew I couldn't just spring this onto him and he would go into complete shock. So I thought, right, okay, what I could do is have a dinner with me and my friends and have Callum there as well. And so Aman thought, yeah, that's a great idea, I can come out for dinner. So we went to dinner in the place I was working at the time as a waitress in an Indian restaurant. So I was like, why don't we go there and you can see what the food's like as well. Very annoyingly, I had 4 of the friends that were meant to come. All 4 of them dropped out at the last minute, and already I was just like, this is just gonna flop. Like, I can't just introduce you to Aman just on your own. I can't do it. Like, I was full on freaking out. And then Aman texted me saying that, look, Abby didn't want to stay at home, she like really wanted to come with me because she knows I was coming to see you. And I was like, oh, okay. And I don't know what it was about that, it just made me feel a little bit better that, okay, it's my brother and my sister coming down. And I could just be like, look, this is one of my friends, everyone else has left for some reason. So Aman turns up with Avi. Avi was about, I think, 4 years old or 5 years old at this point. So she's quite young, and she was obviously jumping all around the place because she's so excited. So we walk over to the Indian restaurant. Callum comes in as well, and then I introduced Callum to Aman, like, this is one of my friends, we're on the same course. And he was obviously asking where's everyone else, and I was just like, well, they kind of backed out, but is it okay if Callum comes to eat with us? And he was like, yeah, I guess that's fine. So we just like had a talk over food, and I could tell the whole time Aman was incredibly uncomfortable. You could tell he wasn't in a great place. So like, once we finished dinner, I just sort of signaled to Callum, like, just go home. Like, I'm not going to be able to tell him, he's obviously too uncomfortable even with the idea of just having dinner with one of my friends. Like, I can't drop this on him today. So gauging by Aman's reaction, I just knew I couldn't tell him. I in my head I was hoping it'd be like Nabella's video, that where she told her sister and her sister was on board straight away and she'd have like someone in her corner to help her fight. But I think at that dinner I could tell that I'd put my brother in a very uncomfortable situation. He was feeling incredibly awkward, and that's when I really felt like a coward, that I really needed someone on my side to help tell my parent, like, I don't need that. Why am I dragging my younger siblings into this? So after dinner it was completely normal. Aman came over to my house. I had a house at this point because I'd moved out of campus, and so he just kind of like, we chilled there with me, him and Avi, and he went home like as if everything was normal. And then a couple of days later, I phoned my dad just to check in how everything was at home, and he mentioned that he'd be coming down on the weekend with my BB, my mum and all the kids, and that would go somewhere nice. And I don't know what it was, but hearing my dad's voice after this whole meal flop and just feeling really anxious, I just broke down crying on the phone that I'm not okay. I can't have all the family here and us just doing something special. Is it okay if you just come and see me on your own? And he was incredibly worried because straight away he's just like, Betty, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I was like, look, I'm fine. I'm going to be fine until the weekend. I just really just need my dad on your own. And he was like, that's fine. Okay, I can come up on the weekend. So that night then I called Callum over. We sat in the kitchen and I told him that, look, I'm going to tell my dad now. I just need you to be aware that it's obviously going to be an initial shock to him, because first of all, my dad already thinks that I don't want to get married, and secondly, the fact that you're white, and thirdly, I've chosen you myself, and it's just going to be a huge shock to him. But is it okay if you stayed in the kitchen when I do tell my dad, and like we're in the living room or something? So we talked it all through. I made Callum aware of, like, if he does ask to meet you that day and he does come out with the whole like wedding thing and all of this, obviously Callum was just like, no, that's completely fine, we've had this conversation before, I understand. So my dad turns up onto my student housing. All my friends had actually gone out for the day. I'd asked him if I could just have the house to myself because my dad was coming up and I was gonna tell him something important. So really kindly all the girls went out and Callum was just sat in the kitchen. Like, this was a pretty big house, so it was like at the back of the house that he was sat there. When my dad turned up, I took him into the living room, which is like at the front of the house. It's right near the front door. I just sat down and my dad was just incredibly worried. I think he genuinely thought it was something to do with uni, because I'd lost a lot of weight at this point as well, just because my mental health was just complete crap. But we sat there in silence for about 20 minutes or something, and he didn't push me to say anything. He just quietly sat there, and I think that made it so much harder for me, because all I could see was my very understanding dad just giving me that chance to speak. He was just being lovely as always. So we just sat there, and then he put a hand on my back, and I just burst out crying, and he just consoled me while I was trying to say words while I was crying. So obviously he couldn't understand anything. He was just trying to get me to calm down so he could actually listen to what I was saying. But I just kept crying the whole time while he's trying to hold me. And then I eventually came out with it that I love you so much, and I know this is going to be a shock to you, but I've found someone that I really like. And I can't remember what else I said, but my dad just sort of paused for a second. Right, I'm gonna have to leave it there for part 1, so I could just take a little bit of a break. And also this video's going to be so long. I know that is an awful place to leave it, but it's honestly just everything that happened after that as well is just as crazy and manic as this one. So yeah, I will end this part here, and I'll continue the second part in a different one.